Well, let's get back into Machiavelli. Remember that we talked about the three interpretations that we were going to look at. And part of the reason for doing this was just to get into the whole idea of interpretation. That there are different views about how to see Machiavelli and any other work, okay? And different ways, different things that scholars emphasize in Machiavelli. Machiavelli himself tries to present himself as an objective reporter, as a sort of new social scientist, somebody who has discovered how to really analyze political behavior. And so I think if you asked him, what are you out of these three, he would probably choose this one. Okay? He does not often reveal himself to be somebody who is trying to destroy morality, although there are some places where you could certainly make that argument. But as self-understanding, probably here. For those scholars who think of Machiavelli in this way, Machiavelli sets the tone for the modern examination of political things. He is sort of the icon of modern social science. And if you read a political science textbook, which I kind of hope you don't, but if you do have to read one, you may see Machiavelli briefly in that textbook as one of the fathers of political science, or one of the foundations of political science or political realism. And in that way, he really is one of them. But Machiavelli has also been called a dangerous teacher. Some people look at Machiavelli as though he has a conscious moral agenda. He's not trying to be objective. He is trying to destroy the existing moral framework, okay, which was already under question from other sources during this period of time and would continue to be so. But the Middle Ages, held this idea of God ruling over man, and God's moral law was an absolute thing, right? Needed to be obeyed. At this point in time, though, because of the behavior of the church and just because of the rediscovery of ancient thought, the Renaissance, okay, people were beginning to question this. And so scholars, some of them will say, well, Machiavelli is a big part of that, a big part of that questioning, okay? And he very consciously and purposefully lowers our expectations for leadership. Okay? Whereas the ancients, like Plato, whom we've studied, and the medieval Christian thinkers wanted leaders who were good morally. They knew that they often weren't, but they wanted them to be, and they thought of their role as trying to make them that way. Okay? Machiavelli says, no, that's not my role. That's not what I want to do. In fact, that's dangerous. It's not effective. You can end up getting yourself killed if you try to do that. So they say, well, Machiavelli started something here by not trying to obtain any sort of inner spiritual or character change, but rather just to focus on changing external behavior. And you do see that coming out quite clearly in The Prince. He's always appealing to the prince's self-interest. He's saying, if you want this, you need to do A, B, and C. Okay? Why? Because that way you'll get more power and all the good things that come with that. People, why should you obey and support your prince? Because he's giving you these things. Safety, you can earn a living, you're not getting taxed too much. Okay? All of these things rely upon self-interest and promote good behavior, but Machiavelli is not concerned about whether the prince or the people are good people in the sense that Plato is. Okay? Scholarly critics say this is where the moral decline started in modern Western political thought, is when we have Machiavelli separating those two things and saying, well, the spiritual agenda is over here and I'm not going to concern myself with that, but if you want to be successful, you need to forget about it and do these things. Okay? And a third interpretation was this idea of Machiavelli as a patriot. And that's what I want to focus on today for the time that we have left. is this idea that Machiavelli's real purpose wasn't just simply to be an objective reporter, okay, although he might have seen himself in that way, and was not to consciously and for all time lower moral standards, but was to make it possible for Italy to become a united country and for people to be governed better. Okay? He argues in a lot of places that, rightly understood, the prince's interests and the people's interests coincide. That they are really the same. Okay? In the sense that the prince should concern himself with the people's welfare and do these concrete things to make them better off. And they, in turn, if they receive these good things, see it in their interest to support him. This is kind of a rudimentary social contract idea, okay? That government is an agreement between the leaders and the people, because they all benefit in some way, okay? And in Machiavelli's case, he was looking at a territory, Italy, which was not a united country at all, terribly divided, often at war with the various principalities within it. The papacy had become a problem politically, in his view. Okay, spiritually, he didn't really comment too much on that. But the papacy, he thought, had become powerful enough that it could contribute to the quarreling and squabbles among the Italians, but not powerful enough to end them. And that's why he didn't look to the church and the papacy as a source of eventual peace. It was more trouble than anything else. Also, he saw foreigners, people from other countries, were able to use the divisions amongst the various Italians to get a foothold in Italy and to gain power there, and alliances and so forth. And he wanted them to be out, clearly. Okay, he did not want these foreign influences in. So, how does he get to all this? What kind of advice lends itself to this idea of strengthening the Italian people and eventually unifying them? Well, in his mind, one of the things that he has to deal with is this idea of fortune or chance. This is why, he says this, because he believes in psychology so much. He's kind of an early psychologist. He asks himself, what's wrong with the mentality of people? Now, again, I'm not saying this is right, okay, but a lot of old thinkers used to ask this question about national character or national mentality. Okay? And Machiavelli certainly does. And since he's an Italian himself, I guess he can get away with it. And he said, the Italians as a people are too fatalistic. Well, what he meant by that was that they too much accept their fate. They're too ready to just